so we're going to start working on our slab box more. So first I'm going to unpack it. So if you packed it up really well, it should be fairly wet yet. Probably not as wet as it was when you packed it away, but it should still be fairly plastic, maybe on its way a little bit hard. So now that I've got this out, I'm going to get my visual journal page that I made for my box. So the whole purpose for making this journal page was to give you kind of a map of where you're going to go. So I did all the thinking work beforehand. That's why we do this. So now I can just have this set out next to me and I can work on my box and just use this as a reference for where I'm going to head next. So I'm going to start by working on the front of my box. So I'm actually going to wrap the sides and the back in plastic, just so that way they don't dry out while I'm working on the front slab. So you can see that it's not wrapped perfectly, but it'll at least keep the back side of the box wet enough that when I come back to work on this later, it's not completely dried out. So for decorating on your front, or even your entire box, there's a multitude of different ways you could do that. You could do slip and scoring little pieces on, just like we did with the letters, or you could carve things in. I gave you a variety of tools, like your skewer, the loop tool. You could even just use like a number 2 pencil, or you can get creative and see what else around your house will make the textures that you want. So don't feel like you're limited to the tools that I gave you. You can most definitely use other things. I just kind of gave you the basics to get started with. So I'm going to start by working on some of my decoration. So I'll show you in a little bit. Okay, so I have been working on my line work here that I'm putting on, but I'm also going to add text on mine. I want it to say my name. Since it's going to be a bank, it's going to say Olson Deposit. So I'm going to cheat a little bit. I printed out my words in the font that I wanted, and I'm just going to cut those out. Okay, so I'm not perfect, and I definitely do not expect you to be perfect. So the reason I printed these out is because that way I know it will be exactly straight. The letters are all going to be the same size, and it's a lot less work on my part to do it this way. So work smarter, not harder. So if there's ever anything that you're putting on any work, really, if there's a way to simplify it for yourself, go ahead and do it. So what I'm going to do, just like we did with our slab letters, I'm going to take my words here and I'm going to figure out where I want to position them, make sure they're nice and straight. And I'm going to take a number 2 pencil, just like last time. Remember, you don't want to use a mechanical pencil because it'll just rip the paper up. And I'm going to trace it. Right, and then once I'm done tracing it, I'll carefully peel off my paper. And look at that, there's a nice indentation there, so then I can go ahead and carve it out exactly the way I want it. And I'll do that again with my other word here. Alright, so now I've got both of my words impressed in here, and I'm going to start to carve away with them. Okay, so I got my letters carved in and stuff. So I want you to notice that I'm doing all of my carving work first, because once I start attaching things on here, it's going to be a lot harder to carve around that, or if I need to rotate the box, I want to be able to do all of that first. So I have things to attach to this side, but I'm gonna wait on that because I need to do carving on the other 3 sides. So I'm gonna rewrap this so that way this side is covered, and I'm gonna move on to my next side where I can continue to work on my carving. So just keep that in mind, that you want to do all of your carving work first. And do remember to be careful as you're picking it up, rotating it, because it is really fragile, and if you push too hard, you could cave in one of your sides, you could cause some cracking or breaking, so just be incredibly careful and gentle. Don't want to ruin the work that you've been working so hard on. So keep that in mind. Okay, so I finished all of my carving work on my box, so now I'm going to work on my lid a little bit. So I unwrapped it from the plastic, and now I'm going to start to work on the carving designs that I'm going to put on the top. Okay, so I've finished carving on my top here. So for mine, it's going to be a bank, so I need that split to go in the middle. So I'm going to cut that out now, but I'm going to use measurements to make sure that it's directly in the center. Alright, so I kind of etched it in, now I'm going to cut it out. So just be really careful when you cut stuff out like this. I probably wouldn't recommend using the butter knife I gave you. Find like an X-Acto knife or something a little bit sharper and thinner, just because the butter knives are kind of thick. And then make sure that you clean up those walls really, really well so it's not so messy. Okay, so I finished all of my carving, all sides on the top, that's all done. So now I'm gonna start on the parts that I'm going to slip and score into place. So working smarter, not harder. I printed out the shape that I'm going to cut out of a slab, and then I'm going to carve in a trombone inside of this. So I cut both of those things out so I can just kind of trace it onto my clay. So I'm going to cut these out, roll out some slabs, and then attach them to my box. So I got my pieces carved out now. I'm going to transfer the picture of the trombone that I got onto the slab, just like we did with those crossword letters, where I'm going to use a number 2 pencil to kind of outline the shape, and then from there I'll start carving into it. but really use that transfer of knowledge about what we've talked about in class and what I've shown you so far to bring your ideas to life. So even if there's something that I haven't shown you and you're trying to figure out, reach out to me, or YouTube is a great place that has so many different resources and people who have all kinds of different techniques and ideas. So no shame in looking past me for techniques, because I am not the end-all be-all master of ceramics. So just make sure that you're, using what you know, and don't be afraid to experiment a little bit and see what happens and try different techniques, okay? Okay, so now that I've got my small pieces all done, I'm going to slip and score them into place. So just like I did with my crossword letter, I'm gonna kind of make marks so that way I know exactly where my pieces are going, and then I will slip and score them into place. So you can see I made some really light marks just so I know where it's going. And since I'm attaching a flat piece to a flat piece, I'm going to make sure that I score up the back of this really, really well as the place where it's going on the box, so that way it's sealed really nice, it's not going anywhere. Alright, so now that I've got everything scored up really well, I'm going to add my slip. Remember to put it on both pieces. If your slip ever starts to get like dehydrated and it starts to feel more like clay, just add a little bit more water. Don't like soak it, but just add a couple drops of water, and that'll help bring the moisture back to it. So remember to kind of push and wiggle. Just be careful wiggling because you don't want to break your box. Alright, so I got that attached, now I have to do the other side. When you're adding sculptural elements to the sides, whether you're slipping and scoring them on or whatever else, keep in mind weight and air bubbles. So notice that the slab that I added onto it is super, super thin. If you're adding like really big flowers or like a ball shape or something like that, just keep in mind the bigger you go, the greater risk there is for an air pocket. So just be super careful when you're adding elements like that. Because I want your projects to survive the kiln. So as best you can, try and keep things thin, hollow, and should all be good. But there's always a risk. So just be smart. If you're ever in doubt, feel free to ask. I will always give you my opinion. So just keep that in mind.